all so much for taking the time on this afternoon. It's lovely to be here. It really is. I guess something of almost an apology to kick things off, where this is possibly the least sexiest title you've probably ever been exposed to for a talk, research at the BFI, an introduction. But what I hope to do is to kind of chart the last few years sort of via the lens of the BFI's research activity, but with a view to maybe, if it's not too prosaic, a desire to sort of mirror the external research funding landscape and some other interesting things that I think have happened in the last few years. I'm very happy to answer any questions. I would say a lot of this is factual, but any opinions I give are obviously my own and do not necessarily reflect the wider BFI. I have to be careful with that. So let me crack on. Um, so when it comes to our research activity, there's really two drivers of that across the BFI. And I should point out that my role traverses right the way across the BFI. Um, and 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 so it is having these two designations or elements of our organizational setup, which has really driven some of the research activity that we have. And what I'll do is I'll go into both of these areas as they've sort of come naturally to me. But there's also a nice area of kind of overlap and interaction as we go on. So the BFI as an independent research organization, or IRO, this is a designation that the UK's research funding councils created. It was actually originally set up to cover bodies like the NHS, for instance, so non-universities which were conducting research. And a few years ago, the AHRC said, well, you know, what about the galleries, libraries, and museum sector? They are hubs, facilitators, but also creators of research and research activity. And so they created this designation, which allows us to apply for and manage research council funding in the same way as a university. So there's currently, I think it's around 26, although don't quote me on that. And that covers most of the major cultural organisations across the UK, so British Museum, Science Museum, and ourselves. And the BFI, we've been an IRO since 2018, and I took up my role in early 2020. And it was the first role at the BFI to really try to understand and to make a go of what it actually means to be an IRO. And as Krista very generously said, before coming to the BFI, I'd worked in various sort of university research office roles. If you've ever engaged with your university's research office, my role is to do everything they do in one person. So no pressure and a very easy role, obviously. Um, what's interesting, I think, particularly since 2020, is the ways in which the AHRC, I guess, has changed its the way it has funded research and the way it recognizes where research is delivered and created. And possibly the biggest change has been the realization, I guess, not to put words in their mouth, but that their annual budgets were stagnating, if getting actually lower, um, but that there was an opportunity for them, for they themselves to apply for funding from bodies like UKRI for specific funding opportunities. And I think the main one that we certainly were very interested in was the first kind of forays into research infrastructure. Um, and I think the IRO sector as a whole kind of helped make the case for that, because we would have visitors from AHRC, for instance, who thought they were coming to a cultural organization, as of course they were, but there was people in white coats and very fancy bits of kit. Um, is someone's
Sounds like ice cream fan.
yeah, sorry about that. That was I thought I was having some sort of an episode there. It's all right. I'll keep going. Um, and so it was this targeted funding of specific calls to support research infrastructure as well as the creative industries, which I think we really benefited by as the BFI. And this was really quite novel, I guess, for the AHRC as a national funder. Yeah. So one of the earliest successes we had at the BFI was on the research infrastructure side of things, um, and we managed to get or to have, I guess, successful engagements with these two calls, the capability for collections and creative research capability calls. And what this allowed us to do, I think, institutionally as much as anything, was to really strategically identify those areas of the BFI's capital and infrastructure which facilitated the research of other sectors, including, of course, academia. And it allowed us to really, for the first time, secure pretty substantial, certainly for us, funding to help with those bits of kit. Um, and this, most of you who have been successful with research grants kind of know it's a bit of a domino effect sometimes, in that research grant can also can sometimes beget further research successes. And we were very happy within our conservation centre um, to have this new investment as well, which is from the AHRC's Riches scheme. Now, why this is exciting and hopefully of perhaps more relevance to you all is this will require the BFI for the first time really to conscientiously and explicitly open its doors and solicit engagement with industry, with academia, and with a wide range of other sectors, including, for instance, national or regional archives. And so over the next 2 years, we are going to be building what we think is a world first, but it's definitely at least a UK first research lab for conservation of the moving image. So it is a new lab. It's its own space, which will have a range of engagement activities, which will enable a multitude of stakeholders to get trained in some of this equipment, to bring maybe some moving image materials that they might have in their archives and expose them to the kind of cutting edge of conservation science. And so we're really thrilled that that arm of the BFI within our conservation centre is really being facilitated by the AHRC to engage and support like some really exciting research. So there'll be a lot more news, I think, on our research lab as it gets developed over the next 2 years. So definitely keep an ear out for that. Um, so slightly connected to the conservation side of the BFI is our digital side, and we were part of the Towards a National Collection scheme, whereby the AHRC was trying to create the conditions for interoperability and discoverability of different collections. So how does, for instance, a picture-based collection, such as the National Galleries, talk to an object-based collection, such as the British Museum, or, speaking for ourselves, how do you bring moving image content into that? And so this allowed us to really cut our teeth on the use of machine learning tools and AI to get our collections to speak to other collections. This was a particular project led by the Science Museum, and it was a program which finished last month, but we are very, very interested in I think, the potential of AI and machine learning for our collections. And one of the things which did I yeah, okay. And one of the ways I think that there is this overlap between, on the one hand, heritage and conservation science and the use of AI and machine learning for our collections, with the more industry focused part of the BFI, was our role in the AHRC's CoStar program. This is on advanced media technologies, which was a pretty major investment by the AHRC. And we were very happy to co-lead the CoStar's Insight and Foresight unit with Goldsmiths, Loughborough, and Edinburgh. And really what this does is, in a sense, extend what our research and statistics unit were doing for the film, animation, and VFX industries to areas such as video games and these more kind of converged areas. From a technological perspective, Unreal Engine was producing some extraordinary capabilities for filming and for VFX, and we really wanted to be at the heart of what that means for the industry. It followed our involvement with the AHRC's clusters program. I was happy to see that there was two new clusters announced, one in the West Midlands and one at Liverpool. But we were involved in the one at York and, of course, Royal Holloway. And this was a fascinating program for us to be part of, in the sense that it was looking for quite untraditional things from arts and humanities researchers. So the emphasis wasn't so much on things like written outputs like monographs or articles, and more on things like jobs, inward investment, leveraged funding from industry, things like that. And I think that too has been a really unique divergence from the AHRC over the last few years. And as I say, we have certainly seen the benefit of that at the BFI. And this led to probably our biggest award just last year from the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, which was focused on the BFI's data and digital preservation capabilities. We have quite a unique requirement at the BFI when it comes to things like our digital preservation and storage capacity, because unlike, as I said, paintings or books, the moving image has really extraordinarily complex requirements for things like preservation. And even from a storage perspective, a single 90-minute film has something like 4 terabytes of data. And of course, within our archive, we would have many, many millions of those. And so this was an investment that allowed us to upgrade our facilities to enable some of the more demanding AI and machine learning demands that we might be able to put on our collection and on our data. And so certainly one of the areas that we're looking to explore going forward is ways of engaging academia and industry to really capitalize on these new facilities that we have. But of course, it might seem bizarre for many of you that even though it's 15 minutes into my talk about research at the BFI, that I haven't actually mentioned anything to do with films. We are, of course, extremely thrilled as well to be co-investigators, or now co-leads, on these AHRC. I don't know if they're called standard grants anymore, but the blue sky bottom-up grant programs. And we also co-direct a collaborative doctoral partnership, which is called REACH, with those, as you see on the screen, those 4 other IROs. And this is a really exciting program for us to have that responsibility, which is we have a new, I think it's 13 PhD studentships that we as a collective are able to offer and co-supervise and co-design with members of the academic community, and they are very wide-ranging in terms of their thematics. And we're in the process at the moment of assessing the current batch, who will hopefully start in September of 2025. But over the summer, we will be opening the new round. So there'll be an expression of interest stage and then a full proposal stage. And it's very much bottom up, blue skies. But from the BFI's perspective, we are most, I think, excited by and interested in programs of research that really bring to light our collections. And so I'm very happy when the new round opens to field ideas that might come from yourselves or any of your colleagues. But although the collaborative doctoral partnerships bring in zero funding at all, they are, in my opinion, probably one of the most prestigious things we actually do. And I think the trust that that is put on your shoulders when it comes to selecting and supervising PhD students, certainly from an arts and humanities perspective, is one we definitely don't take lightly. We greatly value it. So that's a lot of the work we do and as an IRO, and it's facilitated by our status as an IRO. But we also are a recipient and a distributor of national lottery funding. A lot of this is where we fund films and the distribution of films, but we also use that funding for our research and statistics unit. And these are an industry-focused unit who provide a range of different research and statistical analysis for the screen sector. So for the screen sector, that is quite a wide designation. So film, TV, VFX, video games, and animation. And we do a range of things with that unit, purchasing commercially produced data, which we publish on our website and in our various reports, as well as fund independent research. So we have a research advisory group, and I think this was a really interesting thing for me to see when I came to the BFI. It is an advisory group which is largely made up of people from the industry. So whether that's from PACT or Netflix or Screen Scotland or a range of different agencies, as well as one or two academics as well, I should say. And in a very sort of simple way, they bring areas or topics that are in need of research to this group, and then the group decides whether to fund it. So it is, as I said, very industry focused in the way it is made up and the way it distributes funding. But and this is one of the links I can very happily provide if colleagues aren't aware of some of the most recent research that we've funded. You can kind of get a sense from some of these topics what they're focused on: crew mapping, skill scoping for the VFX industry, etc. What's also quite interesting to me coming to the BFI was that a lot of the people who we give the funding to, so we operate a tendering process for a lot of this research, are agencies which I didn't actually really come across before working in academia, if I'm being really honest. So they are almost industrial research agencies like Olsberg and Arup and Oxford Economics, but certainly recently we've worked a lot with the PEC as well, which I obviously did know about. But it was still an interesting finding that it wasn't a lot of academics actually, getting these awards. And speaking entirely personally, I think there was a difficulty in cost effectiveness, I think, if I'm being perfectly honest, where a lot of academic tenders involved a lot of very high institutional overheads, for instance, and were maybe more or less, should I say, competitive than some of these agencies. I've kind of gone off on a tangent there. That is entirely my own reflection, but I'd be interested to go into that in more detail if if people are curious about that at the end. But these are opportunities that are entirely open to academics and academic organizations. So I thought I'd finish, where are we? About 25 past, with two case studies, which again, as someone, I've been at the BFI almost 5 years, but I found these really interesting case studies to maybe demonstrate the way research works at this in this branch of the BFI, and particularly its relation to policy. And so in this case, in this particular case study, we had COVID, of course, and the BFI had been in the lucky position, I guess, of being a convener for the wider screen sector, and had created certain task forces, which were, I believe, initially created after Brexit. So the huge ramifications of that on the sector needed a convener, a facilitator, so that we could speak with a singular voice. And during COVID, it became clear that there was a huge amount of issues right across many areas of the screen sector, but one in particular was around the inability of independent low and mid-budget productions to secure insurance. And the reason for that, of course, was if you had a single case of COVID on your set, the entire thing would be shut down. And maybe unsurprisingly, market-leading insurance companies weren't exactly thrilled with that notion. And so it was really grinding to a halt. So we put the case to the government, to do DCMS, who it was within about 5 weeks, I think, or something along those lines, that this £500 million indemnity scheme was created, the production restart scheme, and then implemented. The RSU were then kind of put in charge of making sure that this wasn't just going to fund, big, large, multi-billion pound US production companies, but that it was actually reaching the independent sector that it was targeted to support, as well as monitoring how effective it was being. And my colleague Ian, who works there, he sent me a super interesting message when I mentioned to him that I wanted to use this as a case study, and it's the bottom point there, that government guidance says that anything with a benefit for cost ratio above 4:1 is very high, and the PRS ended up with 115:1, meaning for every £1 of government investment, there was £115 of cost benefit back. And I think what really struck me was just how quick that came about and how impactful that industrial research was, and also the power of a convening voice for certain sectors. It was quite stark, I guess, when you compared the music sector or the theatre sector, who were obviously suffering hugely. But we were, I guess, because of the post-Brexit infrastructure we had in place, we were just able to talk with a mostly singular voice. And then the second case study was one of the pieces of research that we produced at the RSU was on the pretty dire financial case, I guess, of independent film, state of independent film. And the threats that, for instance, major streamers were having on the sector. And so one of the direct responses of that was in 2024, the independent film tax credit, which I've heard people say is one of the most impactful kind of government interventions in film for many years. But case in point, it stemmed from a piece of research, and so the BFI is now overseeing the implementation of this tax credit on the independent film sector. But almost finally, one of the more recent things that we've done in the RSU is use National Lottery for an open fund called the Innovation Challenge Fund, and this will be up to 6 challenges. which is trying to solicit innovative new ways to overcome certain sector-specific challenges. So the first one was innovation in the video game sector, and there was, I believe, 4 awards for that particular challenge. A second in AI in screen archives. Although I don't believe that has been announced, I can say that that is actually a university who've been chosen to deliver that particular challenge. And then the third one, which is open, and again I can provide links to anyone who's interested, is EDI data for film production, and that closes, I believe, in mid to late January. But I'd need to check the deadlines for that. And that's very much an experimental approach to using national lottery funding to try to, yeah, as I say, generate innovative approaches to overcoming certain challenges in the screen sector. So a final slide on a wrap up on collaborating with the BFI. And it's the point, I think, that is sometimes surprising for my colleagues as much as anyone else, that when we talk about the BFI when it comes to research, in the same way that you talk about a university, and if I say, well, I'd love to collaborate with Bournemouth University, well, what does that mean? It means an individual, and so it's the exact same case with us, that it will often be the skills and expertise of individuals that will create the capacity, I guess, for us to be able to be part of any sort of research collaboration. But the key term there is, of course, resource, which isn't as much of a business as usual activity as I would like it to be, and it's certainly one of the things that I want to bring about more of at the BFI. I don't think I'm being indiscreet to say that, because when you think about having a day a week for 3 years or 4 years, which is a natural enough thing for academics, although maybe not for some academics more than others, but certainly for us, that is quite a big consideration. And so one of the things we do is we have an internal research committee who are the kind of internal checkers and approvers of anything that requires us to be, for instance, co-lead on an AHRC grant. The reality is we turn down a lot more approaches from academics than we agree to, and that is entirely down to resource allocation. I was trying to kind of articulate it, and I guess one way of looking at it is, if you were all biomedical researchers who wanted to work with a hospital, the BFI being the hospital, I guess, in this example, and our doctors to have the freedom, I guess, within the 40, 50, 60-hour week to engage in research is a tricky thing to have to overcome. And so I in particular work as hard as I can to sort of carve out that time when it has that significant strategic overlap with us. But there is then this project partnership role that we often have. It's not something I greatly favor, I'll be honest with you, based simply on the fact that it can be a difficult argument internally to have a situation where we get nothing from the budget but have to give an in-kind contribution. And we're not AstraZeneca or Rolls-Royce, and so this will often be an in-kind, a person will agree to sit on a board, or we'll work with them in disseminating a report or something like that. But we get a huge amount of approaches in that vein, and it's always something that we have to just consider very carefully in terms of resource, things like that. And that's me done. I hope it's kind of shown the diversity of research that we do, the interdisciplinarity of it, the intersectoral way it kind of is brought about. Hopefully some of that is new information to you and how research works at the BFI. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them.
Turn my mic on. Thank you very much for that. Very much appreciated. And I'm going to actually stop recording at this point as well. Gosh, we've got a question already. Yeah, Patty, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, thanks very much. Yeah, thanks, Barry. That was really interesting and insightful. I was just wondering, is there any way of knowing which archives they are? And I don't know if it sounds a bit of a dumb question, but how can we find out what archives you hold? Are there specific, yeah, if that makes sense. I understand they're all film archives, but are there more experimental film archives or independent or documentary or
It's an excellent question, and it is arguably the single most important thing we want to do within the BFI National Archive is to make it the most open in the world by the time of our centenary in 2033. And the interesting thing with the moving image archive, of course, is that it's not just about going into the archive and taking a book off a shelf or an object off a shelf. It's a film canister, and if you open it, it might disintegrate, it might burst into flames, and even if it doesn't, it's almost impossible to tell what exactly it might be, other than its markings. And so, the technical, as much as anything else, requirements for getting something out there in the public is quite considerable. So we do have what's called a CID, or CID for short, and again I can send the link to that. And what's interesting with CID is it's everything we currently hold within our collections, and that is, I mean, feature films are probably the smallest representation within our collection, because we also have the National TV Archive. The BFI has been recording 17 TV channels off air for 24 hours a day for the last 30-40 years. So that is a hugely interesting area of work, and lots of people don't actually think of the BFI as having the National TV Archive, but we absolutely do. What's doubly interesting about that, of course, is that when you're recording 24 hours a day, it's everything in that recording, including things like news bulletins or ads. So that's a huge area of our collection as well. The non-fiction area is almost certainly the most interesting from an historical perspective. So things like NHS on film, educational film, industrial film, film that was produced by the government Central Office for Information from the end of the Second World War right up until its dissolution in 2012. It's a real time capsule. And what CID will also do is it will tell you how you can and where you can view this, which is the key question. Where can I actually see this stuff? Which raises a real unique, I guess in a negative way, fact of the BFI, which is we don't hold the rights automatically for the stuff we hold, which means some stuff we have to find out. What are we allowed to do with this? Are we able to put it on? Can we clear the rights to put it on our YouTube channel or on BFI Player? And that is a labor intensive process. It is individuals hunting down documentation to find who's the rights holder, what can we actually do with this film. And our media tech in South Bank is a real treasure and a real gem when it comes to research, because it is similar to a protected research environment, in that some of the moving image content that we don't have the rights to put completely open, we can still show at the Mediatek. So it is considered, yes, this kind of protected research environment. So it is, in some cases, the only place you can go to see some of this content. Now, it's not beyond me that this is a hugely problematic thing. You have to A, be able to travel to London, and B, be in London to see this at the Mediatek. And so some of the really interesting things we're trying to do from an AI and from a digital methodology perspective is how can you create that protected research environment digitally, so that the geographical kind of obstacle isn't as profound as it currently is.
Great, thank you very much.
So I have a question for you, Barry. What
Sure.
What do you think is next? If you put on or get out your crystal ball, what do you think you're likely to be looking at over the next couple of years? I mean, obviously, like us, you're going to respond to some degree to the calls that come out and the, you know, funding opportunities, everything else. But, you know, looking at the industry and the whole environment at the moment, are there areas you predict you're likely to be getting involved in?
Yeah, I think it won't be a big surprise to learn that video game. I mean, it's not a surprise. Video games is, I think, pardon me, undoubtedly this area of convergence, not just from a technological perspective, but from a socio-cultural one, because although funded programs like CoStar are looking at that from an industry perspective, we're also an archive, and so questions around what do you preserve of a video game? What kind of curatorial decision matrices do you create for that? Similarly, from a special collections perspective, so one of our areas is non-moving image content related to film, so film posters, scripts, all of that really interesting stuff. But with regards to video games, it's the same thing. So that is, I think, undoubtedly something we will have to wrestle with. The second area is born digital content or online media, and my colleague Patrick, who's senior curator of nonfiction, he often characterizes online media as the third age of the moving image. The first was cinema, second was TV, the third is online. And again, socio-cultural questions about what do we, as the National Archive for the Moving Image, even begin to collect, whether it be from social media or other types of media. Like I had heard that every single day there's more moving image content created online than in the entire history of the moving image technology, every single day. And so online media, I think, will be a really key thing for us for both those reasons. And the third thing, this is me being very sort of honest, is the way skills, which is, you know, a huge area. You know, it's definitely not a surprise to hear someone from the BFI talk about skills. However, I feel like skills is one of those areas which is actually beginning to move away from being purely creative industries based towards the heritage sector and becoming that kind of arching question, because we have people in our archive who've worked at the BFI for 30-40 years, who have almost created the techniques around film preservation, but who might be retiring, and so what I see as sitting in between that is the PhD funding landscape, and this is a very tricky a topic to discuss, but you know, previously when you talk about skills in the creative industries, you wouldn't immediately think, oh, PhD students. It was almost like there were two different things. You know, skills is one thing for you know, becoming a DOP, but it's not about doing a PhD, and I do wonder whether there is room for how we as the BFI consider that convergence of creative industries, heritage skills, and HEI and research activity, that whether PhDs might be that interesting opportunity for us to sort of traverse those areas.
Interesting. Any questions, folks, from our assemblage here?
Stunned silence, Krista.
Stunned silence.
That's what I like to do.
Knows. Here we go. Yeah, we've got one down here. Zohre, is that correct?
Yes. Hi. So thank you for all the wonderful explanations. I have one question. Do you, because of the, you said PhD students, I'm currently doing a funded PhD, but I was wondering if there are any possibilities that there might be something of in the form of a placement or internship where during my PhD I'm allowed to do, because there are certain things that I might be interested in the archive, especially documentaries that are related to, because my work is in creative, it's creative writing, but it's multimodal, and I'm looking at animals in meat industry. So I was wondering if there would be something within those lines where I can contact anybody, or if there is possibility for placement, something within those
Sure.
lines.
It's an excellent question, Zora, and thank you very much for the opportunity for me to talk about it, because you're absolutely right. One of the most popular roles we tend to fulfill for PhDs is placements, and they can be hugely beneficial for students, but they are arguably the single most difficult thing for me to set up within the BFI, and that's me being really honest. And the reason for that is we have to make sure that the student has a very fulfilling, rich, rewarding, mutually beneficial experience. And the difficulty, I think, there is actually us maybe not having as public a description of what a curator does, what an archivist does, what actually are our collections. I mean, we had that, a great question, and why that is a problem is because if someone is doing, even if someone's doing a PhD in film, it can be difficult for us as the BFI to think of a placement for them that doesn't already exist, for the pure and simple fact that do you need the BFI for that? What is it that is almost unique that we can provide you? And this actually speaks to actually a wider point beyond PhDs, and it's often the approach we get from academics wanting to collaborate with us, and often they are the experts in a particular filmmaker or a particular film genre or whatever it might be. And I'm always left asking my question, well, what is it that you actually want from the BFI? Because you're the expert actually in this area. You're the one who's written these brilliant books, etc. And so it can take quite a bit of time, Zora, to organize placements in that regard. But please, you're very I'd be very happy to have an email from you. As a rule of thumb, though, I would say the British Film Institute is always going to be the governing area of film interest. So if it's Hollywood or Nollywood or Bollywood or anywhere else, unless there's a colonial edge, which can sometimes be interesting, but that's like the first question. If it's not focused on British film or British film culture, it's probably going to be a no. But thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you. Henry, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, yeah. So you were talking about making the archive more accessible in terms of the film archive. The paper archive has become less accessible recently. It's confined to Berkhamsted and it's available for fewer hours. Can you explain what the logic behind that is, or whether that's a permanent condition?
I have no idea what the reason for that is. I could only speculate. I would guess that perhaps it's down to a question of resource. But the other thing that does come to mind is the BFI is creating for the first time a corporate archive. So previously, I think academics had a lot more access to special collections than they did previously, and wrote PhD dissertations and books about what they found there. And for the last 2 years, maybe year and a half, the BFI has taken the decision to, better late than never, I guess, to conscientiously and proactively create what it's calling a corporate archive. So that is any paper collections relating to itself as the BFI. So the experimental film fund, the film production, all of that kind of stuff. And so I know that has been frustrating for people who had access previously but don't now. So if that is what has caused that could be part of the reason.
Yeah, no, I was actually going to mention, will the BFI's own archive ever become available to researchers again? But it sounds like something else is happening.
Yeah, it will. I mean, that is the ultimate goal, is to make it available. It just, speaking frankly, it just doesn't know what it has at the moment. It needs to fully understand what actually these papers are. Do they refer to people who are still alive, people who are still working at the BFI, people who might have made decisions that wouldn't be popular if they were made, I don't know, widely available. GDPR, I think, is as much as the governing thought process as anything at the moment. That's my limited understanding of it.
Thanks. No, that does probably account for the BFI's own archive not being available, but the move to Berkhamsted I don't think is relevant to that, and it is hampering research. It costs more to go there, and as I say, it's open for a shorter period of time. It's definitely a policy decision, but it'd be interesting to know, what the logic is, or in general, really, when you talk about the BFI's priorities, how they're arrived at as a public institution.
Well, yeah, as I said, I can't really answer to whether, what has got into it being less. It's always been at Berkhamsted.
No, it was available. It's been available to view at London for at least 20 years before recently.
Okay, well, that's actually interesting. Thank you, Henry. In terms of the areas of strategic priority, it's in train, to be perfectly honest with you. It's a point in time where I think we're trying to articulate what the next 3 to 5 years of thematic strategic importance would be. That's largely for the archive side of things. For the creative industry side of things, I think it will always be driven by what industry tells us is important to them, and government to a certain regard.
Thanks.
Mel.
Hi, yeah, I guess kind of picking up on what Henry was talking about. Henry and I both were involved in a kind of loose collective of BFI interested researchers about a decade ago, when Geoffrey Knowles Smith and Christophe Dupin were working on the AHRC funded history of the BFI, which eventually culminated in a book, which I'm sure is on the shelves there. But so I guess we're coming from the perspective of having worked with the paper resources at that time, and I wish it was a decade. 2006. Oh God, yes, you're right. Sorry, nearly 2 decades ago. Doesn't time fly? The book was a decade ago, I think, but yes, I'm really pleased to hear that the BFI is now starting to put its organizational, institutional house in order in terms of archiving its own history. Christophe spoke with great horror of finding, a rotting box of letters from between Ernest Lindgren and Henri Langlois, just, kicked in a corridor somewhere in Berkhamsted. But yes, there was the access to special collections deteriorated on the move from St. Stephen's Street, and then again, it's clearly gone since in recent years. But I do wonder, part of that, as well as resource issues in terms of actually just trying to deal with and map and work out what the holdings are. I do wonder if part of that is also about an overcautiousness or a particular concern around copyright. And I wondered if the BFI was working with any copyright researchers in terms of the way that different levels of legal risk are being considered in relation to the use of copyright materials. So here in Glasgow and in other universities, there is an organisational sort of network called CREATE, which specifically thinks about creative industries copyright issues.
Yeah.
And one of the things colleagues in CREATE are thinking about is, how can a slightly less legalistic, high caution, what if someone were to challenge us and we haven't managed to nail down exactly what the ownership is on this piece of paper kind of approach, how can risk be managed and balanced reasonably? So I wondered, because I mean you go into, the 20 years I've been researching, 20 plus years I've been researching, as digital photography came in, initially I remember taking digital photographs sitting in special collections in St. Stephen's Street, and of course that quickly disappeared. So things like orphan works, but also things like difficult to trace materials. So for instance, one of the examples that they looked at was an artist who had made collages out of advertising images from magazines in the 50s and 60s. Now, technically, trying to trace the copyright of all the photographic images that have been snipped up and put together. So they created a sort of an example of what a high risk approach to what you could digitize would be versus what a kind of a more kind of what realistically might anyone challenge approach. I myself kind of personally collect things like Film Society program notes. Now, technically, I do not have copyright of those, but also they contain things which are quotes from other things because people weren't thinking of that at the time. But again, these are privately, or locally produced ephemera. So there's a question of what's the real risk there. And I wondered, I guess, from a research perspective, whether the BFI was engaging with researchers who have specialism in those kind of copyright, fresh thinking about copyright issues.
Yeah, thank you. I believe so. One of my colleagues, Annie, I think, has been working with CREATE in Glasgow quite closely, and has spoken at a few of the events. I think it's arguably the most important consideration for our head of records or management, who's sort of new-ish within the BFI and whose job it is to oversee all of this. It's an interesting question to think about considerations of risk, I guess, particularly those that might be let's say specific to moving image content, or whatever. But yeah, if there are opportunities, I can drop my colleague Annie an email to see whether there are opportunities for us to do more on that. But yes, my understanding is that she's leading a lot of our engagement with CREATE. I don't know if you know Annie. Do you know?
I don't think I do, no.
Okay,
And I'm not sort of directly involved in that research myself. It's more that I encounter it as a researcher. And I notice, for instance, if I work in the BBC WAC, the Written Archive, because it's the BBC and they work with lots of content creators in terms of the content that the BBC makes and collaborators, the most sort of protective approach tends to be extended to all of the paper ephemera as well. And I wonder if the same thing is true in the BFI, because you work with film, and film as a kind of copyright creative product, whether that means that type of thinking extends. We see the same thing in the British Library, thinking about authorship, and then that extending to various other kinds of things. Whereas if you go to a regional archive where the priorities of local history are slightly different, you might get a slightly different encounter to very similar kinds of materials.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap up there, guys, because we're slightly running out of time. Just to remind people may not be aware, but we have some more really interesting CEMP talks scheduled for the new year. Hopefully Georgia Brown will come and talk about the Screen Skills Task Force, which of course is a BFI project, in January. We've had a bit of trouble pinning down a date, but hopefully that's going ahead. We have CISA, the Creative Industries Independent Standards Authority, which is quite a new thing, coming to talk about what they do in March. And we've also a more academic presentation from Kathleen Briller on representation in media practice in February. So all of that information will go up on MEXA, BAPS, and of course social media in due course. But for now, I would just like to thank Barry very much for an extremely informative presentation. Thanks, Barry. We will put your slides and so forth up on the website as and when, no rush. Have a lovely holiday.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks everyone for
Thank
making
you.
the time. Appreciate it. Take care. Bye bye.